Okay, perfect. All right, we're live on YouTube. So, oh, hello. We're live on YouTube. So without further ado, we can get in and start the event. Okay. Do you have the Canva up, Hannah? I thought you were going to be presenting the Canva with remember I think you downloaded it earlier. Oh, the agenda? Okay. I can do it though. Okay. Skip. Okay, I got it, Hannah. Okay. Okay. Great. All right, so we can get started. So welcome everyone to State of the Horn's second Rewind series event. Today's topic will be Unpacking Emperor Menelik II's reign, and we'll be focusing on the history of Ethiopia during the late 1800s to the early 1900s. So we'll first go over the timeline of today's event. We'll talk about who we are and why we want to have this event. We'll then talk about some of our goals, as well as a thank you to everyone who's helped put this on. So first off, I'll introduce myself. My name is Salam. I'm one of the moderators of this event.
Hi everyone, my name is Hanan and I am also one of the moderators.
Hi everyone, my name is Hannah, also on the team. And Kia is here as well. I don't know if we can hear her, but okay, great. All right, so today's agenda, we are doing our introductions, opening remarks, as well as some information that we want to share with you to start off. And then we'll move into our three speakers. Dr. Solomon Getahun will discuss Emperor Menelik II's reign on modern Ethiopia. Dr. Guluma Gemeda will discuss the territorial expansion and the problem of national integration in Ethiopia. And finally, Dr. Brian Yates will share his perspectives on the duality of Emperor Menelik II, including his military prowess and conquests of southern regions. We'll then move into a large group Q&A with our professors, and then we will move into a smaller group structure. We'll have breakout rooms so that you'll be able to have a little bit more intimate discussions with the professor of your choice. And then we'll come back together for just a minute to have some closing remarks.
So what is State of the Horn? State of the Horn is a nonpartisan platform for constructive dialogue surrounding the Horn of Africa. We seek to educate, spur dialogue, and reach actionable solutions. You can find us on Instagram and Twitter on @StateOfTheHorn. This event is recorded today. It will be posted on YouTube. Given current events, we will be focusing on Ethiopia with the next few sessions. However, we do plan on expanding our conversations and these town halls, as well as history seminars, to include Eritrea, Somalia, and Djibouti. And we will center their voices for those discussions. We also wanted to give a statement regarding the state of Ethiopia. We know that right now is a very difficult time for our community. And the reason why we still decided to have this conversation in the midst of the current events that is happening back home is because there has been great demand for this conversation. We've had hundreds of people with an interest in this conversation, as well as registered for this event. And because we already postponed it 1 week, and with respect to our guest speakers, as well as the registered attendees, we thought it was still important to have this conversation. And we also are recording this event. And so we wanted to give the option for those who cannot join us today to be able to see this conversation in the future. So with that, we wanted to also read to you our statement regarding current events in Ethiopia. After the murder of beloved Hachalu Hundessa, growing unrest, and continued human rights abuses in Ethiopia, State of the Horn was established to foster constructive dialogue amongst the diaspora. Since then, we have seen a proliferation of state-sanctioned violence, ethnic and religious violence, arbitrary detention, internally displaced persons, military conflicts, and censorship throughout Ethiopia. This is gravely concerning, and we believe now more than ever that open dialogue and raising awareness is imperative for community healing and drawing international attention. We will continue to ensure that the various voices in our communities are heard and that we carry on this paramount journey towards reconciliation, peace, and dialogue.
Great. So we wanted to go over some guidelines about our chat section as well as our event structure for today. We had actually disabled the group chat function in previous events just because we had seen that there have been some tensions and we didn't really feel like it was the most productive part of our events. However, based on feedback that we received from you, our attendees, we have actually enabled the chat again for this event, but we do want to go over some guidelines about how we want people to use that feature. So first off, we want everyone to assume that our brothers and sisters on this Zoom call all want the best for our homeland. We want to respect all voices. Please do not use inflammatory language in the chat section or during the Q&A. I think we all know what inflammatory language can be. Please do not target anyone based on ethnic group, religion, or any other aspect of their identity. If you disagree with someone's opinion, please feel free to voice your concerns, but do so in a way that honors you and does not dishonor them. Please avoid comparing pain, struggles, and oppression in order to minimize someone else's lived experiences. We call this Oppression Olympics. Please be mindful of the language you use and the human stories you do not know. Please be mindful when describing violence in Ethiopia. Everyone on this call, most of us at least, I'm sure, have a personal connection to what's going on in Ethiopia. And, we don't want to re-traumatize anyone or, minimize anything that someone on this call or their friends, relatives, or loved ones are going through back home. And we will remove anyone that consistently breaks any of these rules. We will put in warnings in the chat if we notice that the language is getting inflammatory. And if someone continues to disregard that, we will take them off of the Zoom call. And we have done this before. So today's event structure, we value differing opinions and encourage diverse viewpoints, but these sessions are not intended as debates. These are history seminars. So please be respectful of our guest speakers and of each other in the chat section. We ask that you please keep any questions or comments specific to Emperor Menelik's reign. As Hanan mentioned, there's a lot going on right now in Ethiopia, but we want to keep the focus of today's conversation on the history and on, the time in Ethiopia's history where Emperor Menelik was in power. And we don't want to derail the conversation and, avoid potential learning opportunities by talking about other things. After the guest speakers present their information, we are going to have the smaller breakout rooms, as mentioned before, led by a member of our team and one of the panelists. And you can let one of the event hosts, so myself, Hanan, Kia, or Hanna, you can message us, let us know what guest speaker you would like to join in the smaller breakout room. And these breakout rooms, we want them to be more of a conversation as opposed to just a presentation, but we do want to keep to the structure of a question and a response. So, you know, we had some town halls over the summer that were much more free flowing. So we want to keep this a little bit more structured to focus on the objective of learning information about our history. So the purpose and goals, we created this space in response to polarizing social media activity in our community. We want to provide an outlet and open forum for the diaspora. We want to provide a safe and inclusive space for constructive dialogue. We want to inform and educate each other about our colorful experiences. We want to lessen the gap of division between various movements in the diaspora. We want to serve as a neutral space for amplifying marginalized voices in Ethiopia, and it's our hope that through all of this, we can learn from each other. We believe this is important because we have to open the wounds of our past to chart a better future for all. Our destinies are inextricably linked, so empathy, understanding, and reconciliation are key elements to maintaining and promoting peace. We want to maintain a holistic understanding of our history, multi-ethnic homeland, and our complex political space.
We also thought it was important for us as an organization to take these conversations to the next step and make a real impact. So we've instituted exit surveys at each event and have been collecting data to improve future events and to better understand the needs and concerns of our audience. We also plan to issue an extensive research survey for the diaspora. These questions will be shaped based on our town hall conversations as well as our history seminars. And this will be a long-term project. We want to start planting those seeds now. And we plan to present these findings to the following groups, just to name a few, including the Walaita Media Network, the Ethiopian Diaspora Trust Fund, the Gurage Development and Cultural Association, the Oromo Youth Association, the Amhara Association in America, and the Center for the Rights of Ethiopian Women. We also wanted to give a shout out to the various social media platforms that helped promote this event, and we've listed them out for you all to see.
And finally, we did want to let you all know to save the date. Our third chapter in the Rewind series will focus on Emperors Zewditu and Emperor Haile Selassie. That will be in January 2021, exact date to be determined, but please keep in touch with us through Instagram and Twitter. We're on there as @StateOfTheHorn. You can also email us to get on our email list if you're not already. Email us at stateofthehorn@gmail.com, and you'll get updates about when our next events are coming up and be the first to know when we open registration for our events. So with that, we will get into our first speaker. And our first speaker is Dr. Solomon Getahun, and he is an associate professor of history at Central Michigan University, and he will discuss with us Menelik's impact on the creation of modern Ethiopia. So Dr. Solomon, please take it away.
Thank you.
I just also want to let you know, I will give you a 2-minute warning when you have about 2 minutes left in your presentation.
Okay, thank you. One correction though, I'm not an associate professor. I'm a full professor and I've been as such for more than 5 years. But just to let you know, my presentation is about the reign of Menelik, and I start this because everything that happens to us starts from our childhood. But before I really delve into the issue of Menelik and Ethiopia's history, I wanted to make this statement. Ethiopian history, like many other histories in the rest of the world, is an incomplete one. There is no absolute history, especially when it comes to Ethiopia. And in spite of Ethiopia being a literate society, quote unquote, meaning its own language, etc., school system, for many different reasons. In fact, if we look at it, Ethiopian history is really is not recorded to its fullest extent, given the history of the country. So even I, as a professor, am not complete. There are things that would make what I say maybe incomplete or wrong, just based on the information or simply because of my attitude. If, in any case, I offend someone, knowingly or unknowingly, I really would like to apologize first. So please understand me from this point of view. So whatever I'm giving is not the history of it, Menelik. That's what I'm trying to say. Liege Menelik, literally Liege is a title that's given to children of royal families until they become kings or queens or crown princes, etc. So unfortunately for Menelik, while he was at early age, his father, Haile Melekot, is defeated by Emperor Theodros, and he was taken to Gondar. From Gondar, thence to Magdala. Gondar was then capital of Ethiopia. So he was taken there, and he was living with Theodros, who was considered to be the founder of modern Ethiopia. So while he was in Gondar, Menelik had the opportunity to learn the royal etiquette, history, etc. Not only that, Theodros was so impressed, he wed Menelik to his daughter, Aletash. So why did he do that? That's another story. But he was married to Menelik, Theodros' daughter. Then when Theodros moved his capital to Magdala to meet the impending danger from the British, that's when Menelik escapes from Magdala with the help of his uncle Ras Darge and the Wollo princess Workit, and goes to Shah. When this happened, Theodros heard about this from Workit. Actually, Workit, who helped him escape, had also informed Theodros for her own political gains. When he heard that, he didn't really, he wasn't really angry about Menelik's flight, but what he said, according to Tekles Adik Mokria, is that why did he leave Aletash? He was wondering why did he say that. That's also another story. So this is how Menelik's upbringing. Once he arrived in Shah, the Shahans welcomed him, and he, without little or no threat to his throne in Shah, he grew up as a leader of Shah. After Theodoros's death at the Battle of Magdala, it was Johannes who became emperor of Ethiopia. Johannes, his nickname is Bezbez Kasa. So Bezbez Kasa, because of the modern, relatively speaking, the modern weapons he has, was able to really master a formidable power, and he was able to easily defeat people who challenged him, such as Tekle Giorgis, Nugus Tekle Giorgis of or Wakshum Gobeze of Wolkait or Gondar. So he defeats him, and he becomes king of kings of Ethiopia. His title actually is Johannes IV of Zion, of King of Kings of Ethiopia. Zion means Zion. And so Zion is St. Mary Zion Church in Aksum, which is where the holy relic of the covenant is found. So he becomes emperor. I mean, King of Kings, because emperor doesn't really represent Ethiopian royal titles. Ethiopian kings refer to themselves as a, or King of Kings, or King. These are the things. But Americans or foreigners in general refer to our kings as emperors, which is a misleading title. So, while Johannes was as of Ethiopia, ruling Ethiopia, Menelik had also an ambition to be the Ase, or King of Kings of Ethiopia. What King of Kings of Ethiopia means is that every state in Ethiopia, let's use the modern example. The Tigray state has its own king, the Gondar state has its own king, the Gojang state has its own king, the Harar state has its own king, the Kafa will have its own king. So the King of Kings is king over all other kings. So the King of Kings, because he is King of Kings, has no business to meddle in others' affairs. He cannot appoint his own kinsmen over their territory. This is what it means, King of Kings, or the Queen of Kings means. So Menelik also has an aspiration to the royal throne. So he wanted to become King of Kings of Ethiopia. This is when an issue arises. He knew that he cannot successfully challenge Johannes for two reasons. One, Johannes during or after the Battle of Magdala had received about 12 cannons and relatively speaking modern rifles from the British for his help. By the way, at that time, literally every Ethiopian royalty or king had helped the British in one way or another. So Johannes is not peculiar. Not only that, because of Tigray's location, geographic location, which is very near to Massawa, Johannes was able to import weapons that are not available to the rest of Ethiopia. This will change only after Menelik had established relationship with Djibouti and established good relations with the Afar. And when he established, using these relations, when he started to trade with the French in Djibouti, that is when he was going to get relatively better weapons that can really subdue other notables in the provinces. So he tried to do that, and yet he was afraid that Johannes has more weapons, especially Emperor Johannes had beaten the Egyptians 2 times. He had weapons from them. He had beaten the Mahdists more than and at many different places. So he had modern weapons, relatively speaking, and he had also enough gold and silver pieces in his coffer. So he can give largesse to notables who submitted to him. So during this time, Johannes Menelik befriends with the Italians, and the Italians promised him 5,000 Remington rifles. And in return, of course, Menelik would recognize Italian claims on the coastal parts of Ethiopia, but not the Bizen and the highlands of Ethiopia. This was a friendship treaty, and it says this treaty can be amended in respect to business and other things, but not the boundary. So this is a little earlier than the Wuchale Treaty. Then in 1889, once again, Menelik signs a treaty. By the way, when you look at Ethiopian history, it's funny. I mean, it's not funny, but it's sometimes you can call it tragic. All Ethiopian kings, be it Johannes, be it Theodorus, be it Menelik, be it Haile Selassie, be it others, had at one time or another, or several times, appealed to the Europeans, be it the French, the Italians, the Germans, the British, to help them secure their position in return by promising either territorial concession or military alliances or this and that. So that is a very common trend, especially in modern history of Ethiopia. So Menelik signed the Wuchale Treaty. Then he realized that this is the time that Johannes was challenging the British, I mean the Mahadists on the west, and the British, I mean the Italians in the east, who were gobbling up territories starting from Asab all the way to Hamas in the Eritrean highlands. So Johannes was really, really tight. And then Menelik also was beginning to extend his influence over Gojang and the Gemeda and southern parts of Ethiopia. At this time, by the same token, the king of Gojang II was also extending his territories down south, and these two guys will come to loggerheads or will fight each other at the Battle of Imbabo, where Menelik, where Johannes intercedes and asks them why they did, and he penalizes them, and yet he also appoints them. He recognizes, say, for instance, Menelik was recognized as king of Shoa. In return, of course, Menelik recognizes Johannes as king of kings of Ethiopia. By the same token, he also appoints Adal Tesama, or the future Tekle Haymanot, as king of Gojang. And then later on, of course, he will give him, he will recognize his position in Kaffa. He will recognize Menelik's influence in or claim to Wollo. But then later on, he penalizes them by denying those two things. And instead, he appoints Ras Mikael or Ahmadi, Muhammad Ali or Muhammad Ali, I think, of Nugus of Wollo. So this is the time that the Wuchale Treaty is. After this, that the Wuchale Treaty is signed. When Johannes was fighting the Italians in the east and the Egyptians, the Mahadists in the west. The treaty was meant to have an alliance where the two would weaken Johannes to claim Menelik will get the royal throne. The Italians would get their territory in Eritrea. So after he signed this treaty, unfortunately, Johannes dies at the Battle of Matama, fighting to save Gondar. When this happened, now Menelik has the better weapons. He becomes king of kings of Ethiopia. Now, what had happened between him and the Italians will bite him. And so when he became king of kings of Ethiopia, the person who signed with the Italians the Wuchale Treaty as king of Ethiopia was different from the person who became king of kings of Ethiopia. So especially after he realized that Article 17 had made him a vassal of the Italians, he has to negotiate. The Italians would refuse. The Battle of Adua starts in March 1896. Menelik mobilizes his army, goes to the north, and he fights the Italians. Of course, we have to remember before the march, the Italians also, in a classic divide and conquer policy, they approached the Tigrayan nobility, who was really pissed off because the Tigrayan nobility, especially Johannes's children, felt that they were the ones who were supposed to be rulers of Ethiopia. But because of Menelik, it didn't happen. And so they conspired with the Italians to fight Menelik. So these are the nature of the state when the Battle of Adwa was fought. So before the event happened, Johannes, all of them, the Tigrayan nobility, like Alula, the famous general of Johannes, and descendants of Emperor, King of Kings, Johannes IV, would finally stand on the side of Menelik, including the Judge Bahata Hagos of Eritrea, who sends communicates through with the royalty of Tigray, saying that a snake, a white snake, if it bites you, you don't have medicine for it. A black snake, if it bites you, you'll find a snake. This is what's called seminar kind of thing, which it means is that our enemy is the Italians, the white snake. Let's fight them. We can solve our differences. So the battle starts. Everybody joins in from south to north, and the Ethiopians won the war. When the Ethiopians won the war, many Italian officers were brought into custody, and they were taken to Addis. But here, Eritreans blame Eritreans as well as Tigrayans blame. At that time, actually, there is no Eritrea; it was Bahar Nagash. People from the northern part blamed Menelik, for two things. One, he did not try to recover Eritrea from the Italians. Two, he punished the Eritrean Askari, aka Banda soldiers, severely. He chopped their limbs. So because of that, while he had let the Italians go freely, he had punished them. But if you go back in history, Ethiopian kings do, I can answer this during question and answer period, but those are one of the misgivings of the northerners, especially the Tigrayan nobility felt that the reason, according to Harold Marcus's understanding of the situation, the reason why he did not move across the Mereb into freeing Italy is he had three reasons. One, the Italians were sending in 20,000 fresh soldiers to fight Menelik. Two,
just your 2-minute warning, just a heads up.
Okay. Minutes left. So I'll elaborate if there's any question later on. So the army that Menelik marshaled was from all over Ethiopia, and the victory was an Ethiopian victory. I wanted to show you this. If you look at all eyes, I deliberately chose this one because this seems to be a little authentic. If you look at this picture, the one with a headgear, the one whose head is covered is the king. In traditional Ethiopian society, it's the authority figure that will have a hat or a head cover. So you see three people here: Queen Queen Taitu, Menelik, and the bishop are the only ones who had covers. All others don't. The second thing that I want you to focus is look at all Ethiopian eyes. If you look at on the Ethiopian side, you see both eyes. If you look at on the Italian side, you'll see only one eye. One eye is evil in Ethiopian culture and tradition. So that is how this war was portrayed in this picture. So Menelik goes back to Ethiopia. For many, the victory of Adwa was more than the victory of Ethiopians. it is the victory of Black people. If you go down, it's just after 4 years after the Battle of Adwa, we hear the establishment of the Pan-African Congress in the United States. We see the establishment of the Ethiopian Church in South Africa. Once again, look how the things were portrayed. If you go down to 1960s, all African countries used the Ethiopian tricolors in one form or another. They are called the Pan-African colors. And that is what the significance of the Battle of Adwa. It was more celebrated outside of Ethiopia than in Ethiopia because of what Ethiopia means for African Americans or Africans in the diaspora in general and African Americans in the Americas in particular. So this is what's called the Pan-African colors, because if you look at the European colors, if you look at others, the Arab colors, you'll see the similarities or the differences from here and there. So the Battle of Adwa oftentimes is considered as part of the nation building process. In my view, it's not. It is part of a survival of the Ethiopian continuity as a state. But does it mean that it has solved the process of nation building or the contradictions or complaints or grievances that might have existed at that time in what we now know as the Ethiopian realm? No, it didn't. I end my presentation on this note. If you have any questions, I will accept. Thank you. Oh, by the way, these are flags after Italy had invaded and occupied Ethiopia. So what Menelik did was he saved us from being, literally slaves and boys and etc. from the Italians. The previous cartoon was how the Ethiopians kicked the Italians. So pictures tell a lot than words. That's why I brought all this for you to see.
Thank you, Dr. Solomon, for your remarks. We really appreciate it. And now we're going to move into our next speaker, who is Dr. Guluma Gemeda. He is an associate professor of history at the University of Michigan, Flint. Thank you, Dr. Guluma, for joining us today. We really appreciate it. We're looking forward to your remarks. You have 20 minutes. And just to let you know, as Salam had did for Dr. Solomon, I will be giving you a warning at the 2-minute mark. Oh, Dr. Guluma, you're on mute.
All right. Okay. Yeah. All right. Thank you very much. Thank you. I would like to thank the organizers of this event. Actually, this is their second time inviting me to speak to the audience at this panel. I'm also very happy actually to join my colleagues, Dr. Solomon, Getahun, and Dr. Bran Yates, fellow historians. We all do the same thing, but focus on different things. And in fact, I would just like to join Dr. Solomon's remark regarding the incompleteness of history, our knowledge of history, of any society, any states. So the same goes, in fact, for Ethiopia. I do share his remark that even though we have read and we have been teaching this history for a very long time, we may not have a full understanding. We are always open to learn more, actually. That's why we always read and do research to understand more. And I also, in fact, advise the audience to do the same thing. So we are just sharing what we know at this moment. Talking about Menelik's period is not an easy task. Not because we don't know much about him or about his period, but we know so many things, even if in fact this is still incomplete. The public also knows a lot, but not all we know is interpreted in the same way. It's interpreted differently. Obviously, Menelik is a very important political figure in modern Ethiopian history. Dr. Solomon has outlined some of his achievements, his major accomplishments when he was the king or king of Shor, king of kings of Ethiopia. But at the same time, in recent Ethiopian history, he is a controversial person. Some of the stories that we know and we tell about him are contradictory. Professional historians disagree on some aspect of his work or his accomplishments. So what I'm going to do today in the short time I have in the next 15 minutes is to tell an aspect of Menelik's period of the story of his reign. One aspect is very well known, and that's the part Dr. Solomon has focused on, particularly his dealings with foreign powers, his celebrated, well-deserved victory at the Battle of Adua, fighting against the Italians. Kind of unique military victory for an African king over a European army at the time, or in fact, ever since. But at the same time, there are also other aspects of Menelik's time or the history of Menelik's reign that are not very well told, or told maybe in a very contradictory way that people do not agree much on it. It's very important though to know. That's the territorial expansion to the south of modern Ethiopia. I'll focus on both. In fact, I'll focus on the question of modernization under Menelik, because some aspects of modernization were introduced to the Ethiopian society while he was in power, and also a vast territorial expansion to the south had taken while he was in power as well. These are the two things. Well, for the aspect of modernization, it's for what he's praised, like his victory at Adwa. But the territorial expansion to the south is the part which is interpreted differently. There are people who say that was part of his achievement and his nation building effort. But there are others who have been victim of this territorial expansion and who interpret it negatively. So these are the things that we have to know. I think this good to know, it's very important to know rather, because there are some issues that are still affecting the Ethiopian state and the Ethiopian society at the moment, which could be traced back to this time period, particularly the territorial expansion. Related to this territorial expansion, I would also like to say a few things about the problem of national integration. What happened and why are we still facing such contradictory stories, and in fact, even some issues that threaten the integrity of the state. Well, I will not stay more on this one. This is the part already told and well known. Menelik was a Shuan prince who was taken into captivity by King Theodros when he occupied Shua. And Menelik stayed under or at Tewodros' court for at least 9 years until 1865. Well, I think the way we just heard is he stayed at the court as Pierce some says, kind of a guest, a favored prince, but also in fact his stay at Melik's court, although maybe he was treated well, was actually as a captive. He was as a prisoner because he was not released back. Melik could have sent him back to as a king of Shwa if he wanted, not only giving his daughter, but could have released him. But I think he kept him there. So he was as a political prisoner that he stayed. Well, he escaped from that. He got assistance from the Queen of Wollo, or Werkitu. And in fact, she gave him the assistance to pass on to Shah, because her son was also Tewodros' prisoner at Magdala at the time. In fact, Melik was so angered, not Melik, but Tewodros was so angered by her assistance to Menelik that he immediately actually killed her son. So that's the price that she paid actually for assisting him. But anyhow, Melik returned to Shwa. If you go to the next slide, please. Melik returned to Shwa. Well, his return was relatively easy. He was accepted or welcomed by the Shwan dignitaries, but there were also some resistance. Actually, the resistance fell apart when one of the military commanders at the time was Gobana, an Oromo, who was actually commanding mostly the Oromo of Tulama at the time, who had previously agreed with the then governor of Shwa, a man called Bezabi. Actually, he made an agreement to prevent Melik returning, but when Melik arrived, he actually dropped that and broke the agreement with Bezabi. Bezabi was a Shwan himself, and he tried to resist and retain his power. He failed and eventually was taken into prison. I'll talk a little bit more about him later on, how Melik treated him. But the resistance to oppose Melik coming back to Shah was not strong enough, and then he very easily took over the reign or the kingship of Shah and started consolidating his power from then on. As a king of Shah, he had negotiated treaties with European powers, agents of the Italian government, the French and the British, mostly with Italians, and facilitated trade with them, and which helped him to buy or purchase firearms to consolidate his power in Shah first before he contested the imperial power or the king of kings of Ethiopia. Later on, when he became king of kings, as Dr. Solomon has already outlined, he fought the Italians at Adua, and he was victorious at that battle. So this was one of his major achievements of his reign as a king. Next slide, please. The victory against the Italian army at Adwa was quite successful, obviously, but after Adwa, he had also many successful diplomatic negotiations, treaties with the European powers who recognized him at that time as the sovereign king of Ethiopia. These victories increased his popularity both at home and abroad. His popularity at home and abroad, and also, in fact, it increased his power in subduing or other rival lords in the north who were neutralized by the strength that Melik had already gained even before Adwa. So he reigned as a powerful king until poor health actually excluded him from the daily management of the government's affair in 1909, at the time when he actually designated his grandson Iyasu as a successor. And from that period on until his death in 1913, he was totally incapable of managing the state affairs. So focusing on his diplomatic achievements, his military success against the Italians at Adwa, and the introduction of the aspects of modern technologies and institutions and to the Ethiopian society, he is considered both by Ethiopian as well as foreigners, including scholars, as an enlightened monarch and a modernizing one. That's how, in fact, we know, and that story is very well known. So next, in fact, I will focus on the other aspects of Menelik's time and Menelik's achievements, which are more controversial. And I'll try to explain why. As I've said, we have to do this because we need to have a better understanding and to see the both sides of the coin. But despite this rosy image of the emperor, in fact, Solomon advised us not to use emperor, but as kind of equivalent of the king of kings. So anyhow, there is also a negative side to Menelik's story. For example, his early diplomatic relations with the European powers, while Johannes was the emperor, in fact, kind of border treason, which means that to some extent he was actually sabotaging what Emperor Johannes was doing when he was fighting, for example, the Egyptians. He was in contact with the Egyptian Khedive Ismail. When he was fighting the Italians in the 1880s, Johannes was fighting the Italians along the Red Sea coast. Menelik was making his own deals with the Italians, who facilitated his purchase of firearms. That, in fact, was, well, that was not actually the first time. He also did the same earlier in the 1870s, although the two had agreed in 1878 at Purumeda to settle their differences. And he accepted Johannes as the king of kings. But he continued to deal with foreign powers, which was kind of subversive at the time. Although his admirers portray him as a tolerant person, he was to some extent, but when it comes to power, he was not that much tolerant. In fact, the example of Bezabi I've mentioned earlier, who was appointed by Tewodros to govern Shah as a deputy, but when Menelik returned from Magdala, Bezabi tried to resist, but in fact he failed. He was taken into prison, into captivity, and into custody. And Menelik actually eventually dealt with him he actually ordered him killed. In fact, there is the story that actually he was burned alive. So his tolerance had a limit anyhow when it comes to power, as all other kings, of course. But the most controversial part of Menelik's reign is actually the violent and devastating wars of conquest in the south. And there is actually where many people disagree. Between 1875 and 1900, Menelik carried out territorial expansion to the south and annexed vast territories to the south of the Shan kingdom, south of the Awash River. In fact, this was in a way a continuation of what his predecessors had been doing, starting particularly with his grandfather, Sahle Selassie, who had done the same thing, in fact, north of the Awash River, the Oromo in the central Sham plateau was, in fact, that's when they were directly attacked and annexed before Menelik. But Menelik continued the same policy, took it beyond the Awash River to the west, south, and east. He occupied the Gibe Valley and Walega, Arsi in the south, Bale and the Hararge in the southeast, the Gragland, Hadia, Kambata, Kafa, Walaita, and others in the south. All this happened, in fact, between 1775 to 80. This map, in fact, just shows you the direction of his wars of conquest between 1875 to 1900. This is a little bit the central part, a little light purple area is the original starting point. But he moved way into these areas. In fact, this map shows some of the dates when the time when this happened. So that's how the modern Ethiopian states with the modern boundaries were created. That didn't exist at the time of Todros, farther north, nor by the time of Johannes. We can get into other argument, or not really argument, maybe questions later on, clarify some of these points if you want. So the territorial expansion was accompanied by wars, or accomplished through wars. And of course, these wars destroyed villages, killed and injured millions of people. Many people were taken into captivity, were enslaved. In fact, there is the argument that Malik was against slavery, but there are in fact ample evidences, even if after he had actually declared that he outlawed slavery, encouragement or to some extent pressure from the Europeans who were against slavery at the time. But even after he did that, he continued to have and take slaves himself, and allowed his officials, generals, to do the same thing. So give you some examples of that. So after conquest, in fact, a more lasting one and more burdensome for the people who were affected by these wars is that there is a system of administration that was established called the Neftanya Gabbar system. Well, this term has been, in fact, kind of politicized, and there are a lot of controversy around it right now. I understand maybe we can raise it later on during question and answer, but this was a system anyhow that was established, which means that the people that Menelik had appointed over the conquered people were called the Neftanya. These are nothing, in fact, than people who were holding arms, the Neft, and they had a lot of them as compared to the people who were conquered, who didn't have none, or who had none, or maybe very little of it. So it's the people who administered. Actually, I was kind of curious, not curious, actually, I was just watching when my colleague was earlier calling about the kings not really getting involved into the affairs. So the king of kings not getting involved into what the kings did in their own territory. Maybe that's to some extent true in the north, where the traditional ruling houses existed, and even after they accepted to pay tribute to him, accept him as the king of kings, they retained their positions. This was not an option that was actually left to the majority of the southern conquered ruling houses. In fact, as you shall see, this was not the option that actually the king of Kafa had, who died in captivity. The king of Walaita, who was taken into captivity, was returned back to his kingdom, but actually he was not the king of Walaita after a conquest. In fact, there were governors above him. To him, he had to pay tribute. So the way that these southern territories were treated differently from the traditional northern Ethiopian norm is quite obvious. there was no king of kings. There was quite a few who retained their positions, like in Jimma, Abajifar, and there is a couple of them in the southwest. But none of those earlier ruling houses or their descendants actually continued with their positions. Menelik actually appointed governors outside the province or the kingdom after this. There is other thing, in fact, more economically more harmful to the people was actually the dispossession of the land alienation. This was complete alienation in a way. To the extent even, in fact, other European powers who colonized the rest of Africa actually really did not apply. Of course, they took land in many places, but not really the extent of the alienation that happened into the southern parts of Ethiopia. This is the Kalat system. What happened was after the war ended, things settled a little bit. What Malik did and his successor did is actually take away all the land. 2/3 were totally taken away, given to the soldiers and the church, and retained by the king, and only 1/3 remained to the local population, which totally made, in fact, those who had small pieces landless anyhow. So that's another. And the rule itself was carried out, in fact, from a strategically placed katamas, where this became, in fact, the katama is the term we use for urban. In a way, in late 19th century, early 20th century, southern Ethiopia, katama is a military garrison. Of course, it developed into a modern town. So it's not the normal way, actually, urbanization happened in other parts of the world. This happened, actually, urbanization came out of a military garrison where the soldiers lived with their families and followers, and thousands of them being fed and supported by the conquered people. If you could, yeah. Next slide. Okay, next slide, please. So this process continued, and I think there were many people. I think I have to go through very quickly the remaining part. If you just saw, so there were people who were affected by this conquest. And this is, in a way, a kind of a recent memory for the descendants. It's only 2-3 generations separated from this. If you get to the next slide, please, so I can go through. It's I have still some more minutes, don't I? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So just since there is some disagreement on this, I just would like to cite some examples of people who had witnessed what happened at the time. These are a few foreigners who were in the area at the time. One was this Catholic missionary was serving then in around Harar, Marshal Dizalviak, who actually talks or attests to the atrocities carried out during the conquest. In fact, there is a highly controversial and debated issue at this time, but I'm just referring to the priest who mentions this or writes this. He says, furious about the resistance, or he's referring to Raswell de Gabriel, had cut the wrist, actually, in there is an error here, the wrist of about 400 notable Oromos in one day alone, he says. And he claims that they have witnessed or saw these people, or some of the victims. Another one who accompanied Menelik in the conquest of Walaita in the war in Walaita in 1894, in fact, tells a horrible story of how the people were treated. And another Russian foreigner, in fact, a Russian, who had visited Kafas 7-9 years after it was occupied, tells the same story. In fact, Bulatovich was not in Kafa at the time of the war, but when he visited it, in fact, he claims that he has seen open fields that the people attesting to the days and displacement of the people during the war. These were some of the pictures from during the conquest of Kaffa. This is now, in fact, this book was published in 1896, just 2 years after what happened. And this guy is J.G. Vanderheim, is a French national who was with Menelik at the time, took some of the pictures and wrote a book about this. This is now, I think, if those of you have not seen, this is actually translated into Amharic now, and you can read it from there. I don't have time to go into the details, but this is a picture of the people who were captured during the war. And some of them were distributed to the soldiers, including the king taking his share. If you go to the next slide, please. I think there is one I missed, but that's fine. Yeah. Okay. This is, I think, the question that we have. I think the controversy we get into, particularly on one side, when if you focus on the achievements and the Battle of Adua, his successful dealings with the European powers, and the fact that he was able to retain his power on keep Ethiopia as an independent state when other Africans were conquered, well, good achievements, worthy of praise. But at the time, if you look at from the eyes of the people or the descendants of those who had been affected by the brutal wars and the post-conquest occupation, and the tribute paying, heavy tribute paying, and the alienation of land, all these things actually, the story changed from a modernizing, tolerant king to someone who was cruel to the people. In fact, the people who are now included into the Ethiopian state. So it's, I think this different entry points into Ethiopian history for many people actually, that the controversies about him and the way we treat or the way we look at sexist time period comes from, and that we have to have a better understanding of it. Because people who had seen the devastating side, in fact, saw Menelik in a different way than those, in fact, who were part of the conquering army, who took the land, who took the resources, and who enjoyed better life. In fact, could say definitely, in fact, they tell a different story. So this is where, in fact, we see history having two sides, and that we have to know both sides to tell the whole story, even if we may not be able to tell it completely, but somehow have a better understanding. The other part I would have liked to talk, but I don't have time to do right now, is actually on his the claim on modernization. Of course, many things happened in terms of modernization during Menelik's time that didn't happen before him. But how did this go, and how did this affect the society? What Ethiopia could have done if, in fact, the process of modernization was different. By the way, Ethiopia in late 19th century and Japan were more or less in the same position. And the Japanese monarchy, their modernization, the modernizing project, in fact, took off Japan into a different level, while Ethiopia, in fact, didn't proceed much or go beyond this Neftanya Gabbar system that Menelik had instituted and with which we had stayed until, in fact, almost the late 20th century. And even, in fact, when that system is removed, we have never been, in fact, better off because of the chaos that followed, and some of it, in fact, as a spillover from Menelik's period. So that's all, in fact, I would like to say at this moment, and maybe probably I could elaborate more during question and answer time about Menelik. That there are, in short, what I'm saying is that there are two sides of the story, and that he's to some extent praised and considered to be the father of modern Ethiopian nation. Also, in fact, that the nation building is actually an incomplete project still. But on the other side, there are people who have suffered a lot from this and continue to see his time and the Menelik, the person, and the reign of Menelik as a catastrophic moment in their history. And the spillover, in fact, is still going on. And we have still debating how we got to where we are right now. So that's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Guluma. And if you are interested in hearing more from him, definitely message us that you want to join his breakout room. We'll be going more in depth, so we'll be able to have a deeper discussion. Thank you so much, Dr. Gemeda. And now we're going to move into Dr. Brian Yates. Dr. Brian Yates is an assistant professor of history at St. Joseph's University. And so he will also be discussing the duality of Menelik, his military prowess, as well as, again, his conquests in the southern region of Ethiopia. So Dr. Brian Yates, I will get your slides up and we will take it away. And I will also give you a 2-minute warning as well. Dr. Brian, are you there?
Yeah. Sorry, I was about to type in the chat. Okay, everyone can hear me? Yes? Cool, great. Okay, first, good afternoon, everyone. It's been a good weekend, as you tell by the back sign here. Go Biden, again, from Michigan to Pennsylvania, hey, we pulled through, right? Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. All right, and here, I'm going to talk about not only Menelik, but also the discipline of history. And I think that Joe Biden is a good place to begin. For Joe Biden, he could be a crazy socialist. He could be a savior. He could be anti-Black. He could be pro-Black. He could be empathetic, or he can be, to some in denial, pathetic. And here the idea is that people use, especially political figures, to create a narrative that they want to support. So if you want to make the argument that this country is becoming socialist, then Biden's a socialist. If you want to make the argument that this country is going downhill, it's because Joe Biden is pathetic. Joe Biden isn't changing. The narratives around him do. And so what I'm going to do today is to look at the narratives around Menelik. And also, real quick, I'm an associate professor, not an assistant. Again, and I have tenure. So again, the ranks are.
My apologies.
Oh no! It's not a big deal. Though. You're doing a whole lot. It's no problem at all. But they are. And the fact that Solomon, congrats again, full professor, wonderful work, my man. Keep on doing it. All right. Okay. So here I'm going to go through 4 narratives of Menelik. First one, Menelik the racist. Second one, Menelik the hero. Third one, Menelik the colonizer. And I'm going to make the argument that Menelik is none of these. In real terms, he's just simply a pragmatist. Next slide, please. Okay, first thing, Menelik the racist. And I'm gonna give a bit of a context. In the early 19th century, actually, this picture here is taken from my book, from the American 1903 mission to Ethiopia. And the Americans wanted to open up relations with Ethiopia, but America had an issue. America was, and is, a white supremacist state. And so how can you sit there and have an equal relationship with a Black nation while holding down all the Black people in your own nation? So they had this contradiction going on. They wanted to get the raw materials out of Ethiopia, but they knew they couldn't do that if they didn't treat Ethiopians as equals. So they had a very, very interesting way of doing it. And I'll read you the quote right here. And this is a response to a Haitian. Again, another problem for America, where you have in the Western Hemisphere a free Black nation, which they did not acknowledge for decades. And so this Haitian goes up to Menelik and asks them, can you please, and this is going right into what Solomon did at the end of his presentation, can you please be the leader of our Pan-African Association? This is how Menelik responded. Yours is the most excellent idea, my young friend. The Negro should be uplifted. I applied your theory, and I wish you the greatest possible success. But in coming to me to take the leadership, you are knocking at the wrong door, so to speak. You know, I am not a Negro at all. I am Caucasian. And let's sink that in for a second here. You see the picture of Menelik right there. I don't know how Skinner didn't laugh at him, even if he said it, which again, in Amharic, the word for Caucasian is Faranji. And so there's no way that Menelik's going to call himself Faranji in his own country. You know, it's just impossible. And so there wouldn't be a language to express it. But the fact that that Skinner not only believed it, but then published it, and it's in his book to this day. And so here the idea is that in order to make sense of Menelik, he had to become white and Caucasian, because then you can deal with him as an equal. And then even at the time after Adwa, after he won it, he was relabeled into a white Negro or a black Caucasian. And I'm just like, again, I don't even know what those words mean. I mean, I think the fact that you're Caucasian means that you're not black. It's kind of hard to be two things at one time. And so here, the reason why this narrative was pushed forward is because the only way you can understand Ethiopia being able to win the Battle of Adua was that they aren't black and they aren't African. They're these, I don't know, these Middle Easterners who lived for thousands of years in Africa. And to this day, this image is still strong. So for example, a few years ago, there was an article in the Journal of Ethnic Studies called Not Black, but Habasha. Again, not black, but Habasha. What makes you Habasha is the fact that you're black, and vice versa, right? And again, this isn't a serious scholarly journal. So still to this day, you have this image that somehow Ethiopians aren't black and aren't African. And again, the idea here is that it becomes in the fact that they dispel so many narratives, so many notions of what people think Africa or blackness is. All right, thank you. Can you move to the next slide, please? This one. And again, I think that both Solomon and Guluma made this argument in terms of the image of Menelik as a hero. And here the idea is that, again, Menelik was the victor at Adwa, and therefore this becomes a victory for all Ethiopians, right? And again, something that's facts that again you have all the entire empire playing a role in Adwa, right? And then seemingly three, that you're seeing that especially as I talk to a lot of my undergrads about this, that a lot of times undergrads argue just because it happened this way, it had to happen this way. And Guluma did a very good job summarizing a great deal of the conquest and the brutality of them in there. But if you want to view Menelik as a hero, these conquests had to happen. And again, that is a horrible kind of way of doing history, but it's a key part of this narrative of Menelik being solely a hero and being something that is had to happen. And here, this is coming from Menelik's Chronicle, and here I was going to do a pub. This is not my book. I'm not a high publisher, but recently in the last year or so, there was a beautiful 2-volume set of Menelik's Chronicle written in English. I mean, the French one's widely available and the Amharic one as well. But again, it's a beautiful thing for understanding, at the very least, how Menelik wanted to present himself. And so this is in the annotations in the chronology, in the Chronicle. According to L.G. Morrow, it was the inhabitants themselves, and this is the people of Barana, who asked Menelik to protect themselves against the British of East Africa and the Italians of Gemeda. And here the idea is that, again, in order for Menelik to be able to defeat the Italians, he had to conquer the South. He had to extract the resources in a very brutal way in order to defend his nation. And so when you say that Menelik is solely a hero, what you're doing is you're erasing all the negative experiences that Guluma was mentioning in his presentation. And so here again, but if you want to sit there and celebrate Amhara or Ethiopian nationalism, this is a narrative that you're going forward, that Menelik is solely a hero, and he was not at all brutal. He was tolerant. He made people's lives better. And again, there's an aspect of that in his life, but there's also the significant negative experiences that Guluma was referring to. Okay, can we get the next slide, please? This one here, Menelik the colonialist. And here, in real terms, he was very much an African participant in the scramble for Africa. And again, for the non-historians in the room, the scramble for Africa was when literally Europe got together and came up with a plan of action to conquer the entire continent. And their first plan was to not get in each other's way. They realized that their own greed could cause two European armies to fight over an African territory. And if that's the case, the African territory could win. And this is exactly what happened in Ethiopia, where you have French, British, Italian guns in Ethiopian hands against the Italians. And one of the things that Menelik was able to do was to play one side off each other. And again, and so here, but in this, he was actively trying to conquer territories and get a presence to beat out Europeans. And again, if you look at all around, you have the Brits in the north, you have the Brits in the east, and the Brits in the south. You have the French in the east. And so you have and you also have the Germans who are also pushing up. And so here again, Menelik is very much conquered these territories in order to stop them from being conquered from the Europeans. And I think that a lot of the quotes that Guluma used were very much spot on. And again, they were the campaign of Kaffa and the campaign of Guluma were some of the most brutal. And here, this is coming from the chronicle that I showed you before. So this is Menelik's own voice, and Menelik's own kind of official history. And this is what he's saying about the people that he conquered that day. The number of quote unquote pagans who died or were captured rose, without counting women, up to almost 120,000. Again, this is a great deal of people. This is a great deal of brutality, right? And this is coming from his own chronicle. I can't imagine if someone didn't have a stake in this, what they would say. The soldiers, having ravaged the land for 2 or 3 days, returned to the camp. It was impossible to count the number of cows taken, for the soldiers killed a large number of them. Those that remained numbered 36,000. And again, this is coming from his own chronicle. This is not some outsider. It's not Vanderheim. It's not an outsider. This is sort of, and again, you're supposed to minimize the brutality in your own chronicle. And here, even if it's minimized, it's still incredibly brutal. But I prefer to refer to him as Menelik the Conqueror. And I'm not sure how it's going to work because I think this is Google Slides. Can you press the next slide, see what happens? Oh, hey, press it one more time. Gotcha. Okay. And so why do I say conqueror? The reason why colonist is used so often in referring to Menelik is that it allows for scholars to springboard colonial theory into Ethiopia. And when I say colonial theory, the argument here is that, well, Menelik is a colonizer. Therefore, he treats the southern groups just like the Brits treated who becomes Ghanaians, whoever becomes Nigerians. And the problem here is that Menelik's administration was significantly different from European colonizers. One, Europeans pride themselves on separating themselves from their subjects. They said that, hey, and again, there's a really beautiful book by Karina Ray that argues that before colonization, Europeans had African wives, African children, and it was an issue. Once the administration came in, they had to literally separate these people from each other. They're separate European quarters. In Ethiopia, the opposite. There was a concerted effort to bring peoples together. Menelik himself, his wife, Oromo, the mothers of his children, generally, are Oromo. Haile Selassie, not only an Oromo mother, but an Oromo wife. This is very, very typical for Showens. And then secondly, in terms of integration of elites, you're finding all throughout the empire, elites of various ethnicities, various religions, various provinces brought in to there. So you're finding that Menelik, when he establishes his cabinet, his cabinet was as diverse as his empire. Okay. So I'm going to have 2 more slides to go. Hopefully I'm going over time. So the second thing is going to be Menelik the pragmatist. And if you could please do this. Oh, thank you very much. Okay. So why is, and again, just to kind of sum up here, Menelik the colonist is one that a lot of ethno-nations are going to use. That basically the same reason why Oromia needs its own state is because Ghana needs its own state. And the same thing that the Ghanaians had to deal with fight for freedom is the same thing Oromia or Sidama or the Somali regions or the Southern territories going on. So lastly, Menelik the pragmatist. I put down here an ethno-national identity would put him with his immediate family. And again here, you are seeing Oromo, Somali, Tigrinya, Amhara all around in terms of his own family. So how are you going to say, okay, well, I'm going to systematically erase or disempower people who are Oromo, and then, but not including my wife, not including my grandsons, not including all the various people I married my relatives off to, his province and his empire. And again, the idea here is that Ethiopia is not winning Adua with just quote unquote Amhara. They're winning it through the unity of these various groups. And which goes in the second point, is that if Menelik fundamentally is trying to rule, he's going to need all his people on one page. And how do you get people off your page? By oppressing them for who their parents are, what religion they follow. And if we look again, they're bringing back on Biden, there are a lot of ways that, again, Biden had a very, very wide tent. He did what he could to appeal to every group. This is exactly what Menelik did. And here, it would also, being an ethno-nationalist, would also contradict his own policies. So, for example, Solomon brought up the Council of Gemeda. This is where not only was Christianity the only religion that would allow one to keep one's land, but a specific denomination or interpretation of Ethiopian Orthodox Christianity. Tawaheda was the one that was the national one. Menelik Shoa largely was Sosladat. And so here, when he became emperor, he reversed those policies. In addition to that, Muslims were a large part of not only a significant part of Shoa, but also neighboring Wadu, which at time was a majority Oromo and majority Muslim province. He had key alliances in these. His daughter was married, or later on was married to Muhammad Ali, who becomes Meneliks Mikhail. And so here again, why would you sit there and alienate those who are helping you administer state? It just doesn't make logical sense. And then so here for the last one, and this is coming from, again, his chronicle. This is in response to the marriage I referenced earlier, where when Menelik was going to marry his daughter Shorega first was married to Ras Gobana's son, the Oromo general we talked about last time, marrying her off to Meneliks Mikhail. And I too was not a big fan of Meneliks Mikhail, so she was sort of against the marriage, but he was able to convince her by using the phrase, adding water to milk that will increase and clarify. And the idea here is that if you want more milk, you must mix the people. You must add water to it. And again, here, it's a very pragmatic move. Okay, thank you. Last slide. Okay, so conclusions. The various views of Menelik are marinated to fit into diverse narratives, either white supremacy in terms of the Americans or the various ethno-nationalisms. So again, here, just kind of, if you want to see Menelik as this hero that fits into Amhara must run the state, and that Amhara are the rightful rulers of the state. But then also, if you want to see him as a colonizer, that would say that, again, the same reason why the Ghanaians, the Kenyans, Ugandans have the right for freedom against the British, the same reason for all the southern territories to make that. And then also it allows one to use colonial theories that are coming out of Europeans colonizing Africans and just apply that, just cut and paste it into the Ethiopian situation. 2, Menelik led and created a diverse state, not because he valued inclusivity. Again, it's not about Menelik being this peacekeeping guy that wants to make the world all equal. No, it was because it was the most effective way to accomplish his goals of his nation, which are security, centralizing authority, and modernizing the economy. And I think that Guluma was right that, again, Ethiopia had to go a very, very long way in order to become a modern economy, but a way to speed the pace of modernity isn't alienating most of your citizens. Lastly, with his actions, he would not be solely a hero or a villain, rather both. Not a colonist, but undoubtedly a conqueror. Not an ethno-nationalist, but also not an advocate of universal human rights. Because again, Guluma, you're right. You see widespread slavery. You're seeing a great deal of oppression, all around. I mean, North and the South. And so he's not a guy that's trying to make the world equal or make this classless, utopia. He was an individual that was trying to run a state. And in running that state, he had to make a great deal of pragmatic choices in order to endear as many people as he could within his empire to him, as opposed to going away from him. And again, I keep bringing up Adua, but I think it's a perfect case. Solomon brought up the white snake, black snake thing. And I think that here, snake is one of the important things, that he's referring to himself as a snake, a black snake, but still a snake. And I think that he realizes that he's doing this, this oppression, but that the oppression that he will give, there's a remedy for. And I think that here the idea is that Menelik, even the conquered, I think it's really, really telling, is that even the people of who were conquered recently, they showed up and fought at Adua. And again, I think that is a really telling thing that gets in the way of a single or even a dual narrative about this man. And I think, again, he is someone that has accomplished both good and bad. And depending upon what kind of narrative you want to paint, you depict Menelik in that way. Have it be the colonizer, the hero, the villain, or, as I put him, pragmatist. All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Yates.
Thank you so much, Dr. Yates and Dr. Gemeda and Dr. Getahun. We really appreciate your presentations and sharing all of your knowledge with us. We're now going to switch into our large Q&A. In our large Q&A, it will be 20 minutes, and we have questions submitted to us and questions we've also considered ourselves that we think are really important for this discussion. And I'd like to remind the speakers that your questions should be no more than 2 to 4 minutes each, and we will remind you if you go over that time frame. So the first question that we have is for all three of you. So someone asked, was Menelik II's march into the southern part of Ethiopia a colonial conquest, an expansion, or a reappropriation of lost territory? What is the difference between these practices? And I will also be posting the question in the chat, and I will give the speakers a moment if you'd like to collect your thoughts. Dr. Gemeda, if you'd like to go first.
Yes, okay, sure. I would like to go, yes. Well, a good question. Because this is a question that's going around, I know many people do ask and raise because historians or people who tell histories use these different terms. Well, we all told this story and how contradictory they are, because they are really contradictory. I agree with Dr. Yates that the different ways of characterizing Menelik, and I believe he agrees with me that he's a conqueror. So expansion, conquest, I think that's basically what it means. But I don't know whether that's maybe we make too much distinction between conquest and whether this is expansion or colonial conquest. Well, in some colonial theories, there is this attempt to make it only this a modern theory that applies only. It's colonial if it's done by a European. Colonialism can happen by anybody. It's essentially, I mean, it is when one group or one power takes over another place, another people by force and imposes its will and takes the resources. So in that context, I don't think that trying to put too much distinction between it's an expansion and a colonial conquest is actually not really very helpful. It won't, well, we may not be able to resolve or separate these two things. But we do understand whether people were affected because of territorial expansion or colonization. For the people who were the victims of this, it doesn't make much difference. Where a Ghanaian is ruled by the British and someone from Walaita or Kafa or an Oromo is ruled by Menelik, who is not a European, white, the effect in the life of the people who faced it is the same. Well, we may disagree with my friend, Dr. Yates, that the Ethiopian, the Meneliks way of administering is different. Actually, I refer to the first point that he raised when Skinner or the Westerners to deal with Menelik as equals, they have to make him white, Caucasian. Well, in this case, Menelik did allow, or himself in fact related to the people whom he had victimized. But what he did was actually first make them different or separate from what they are. There have to be some, it didn't make them white or anything, but he made them look like or be, he's an Amhara, a Shan, make them like that, even if he has in fact maybe some relations to non-Amhara blood. But he has to, or that person that who were accepted into the inner circle or became part of the system. Originally, yes, they are. Specifically, you can talk to Habte Georgis, for example. Yes, he came to Melik's court as a captive. He was taken in a battlefield, was taught and came the court culture and became, in fact, an important official in the court. Habte Georgis, when he died in 1926, was for all practical purposes a Shan Amhara, although he's an Oromo origin. So in the process, Menelik and the court have actually converted him or made him into what they wanted him to be. And that's how he was accepted. And so I think maybe we can debate that. That's a different story. But I think coming to your point of conquest and colonization, I don't see much different. I think it's a muted debate. Yeah, okay, I think maybe I don't have that time. I will leave it there and maybe others can take it over.
Thank you. Dr. Yates, Dr. Getahun, would either of you like to share?
I can, and then then hopefully Salma will have the last word. What I was going to say is that I think that the issue here is that, like, when I make the argument about, and actually, no, I'll be personal here, right? I'm a Black American, right? And like, there's nothing that I could do, not that I want to become white. It's right. Yet, Dr. Gemeda just said, within a lifetime, and I don't believe in this Amharization stuff, but go follow in his argument. Habte Georgis became Amhara. And so when we talk about colonialism, we're talking about the language of race, not of ethnicity, not of culture. And so there's nothing that a Ghanaian could do to become British now and then. Unlike the options open to the elites, even in the conquered territories. And so I would say here, it's undoubtedly oppression. Conquest, fundamentally. Brutal conquest especially, incredibly oppressive. But it's not colonization because it's not built through race. It's not built through separating people. It's not built upon uplifting one group, all of them, and bringing all the others down. And again, as an American, like this is like, the differences are so clear. I mean, again, like within, even if you want to argue that the Oromo and the Amhara are separate, within one generation, there's an Oromo on the throne. My people have been in America for more than 400 years. And we have a half Kenyan, half American who was president, but there still hasn't been a Black American on the throne, right? And it's been 400 years, And so again, I would say, and this is because we govern along racial lines in America. While in Ethiopia, there may be lines, but these lines are blurred. And they're blurred every day because people are interacting with each other. Muslim, Christian, Oromo, Amhara, Somali, etc. That you're not going to find too many genealogical trees that's not including, especially elites, all the ethnicities of Ethiopia. So I would say again, conquest, brutal, oppressive, undoubtedly, but it isn't colonial because they are not remaking and reshaping identities. They're reshaping what it means to be Ethiopian, as opposed to the other way around. Yeah. Oh, so I'm done. Sorry about that.
Oh,
Thank you so much, Dr. Yates. Dr. Getahun, did you want to respond to that question as well?
Yes. I would love to. As I said earlier, Ethiopian history is incomplete. It's not by design, but for many different reasons. So to answer the question that is Ethiopia a colonizer, expansionist, or conqueror, I wanted to predicate my answer based on these two names. Habesha and Ethiopia, Abyssinian and Ethiopian. If we look at Ethiopian kings, when they write their correspondences to various European powers, or when they write amongst themselves, they always say King of Ethiopia. They never said King of Habesha. The earliest time that we see Habesha is when Izana, I think, had conquered or defeated Meroe around the 4th century AD. And he says, I, Izana, king, son of El Amir, etc. I conquered the people of this, including he sometimes refers to other ethnic groups. Otherwise, he never, our kings never said Habesha. So where did this Habesha paradigm or Habesha name came from? Some would say it's the Arabs, some would say the Europeans. As Ethiopian and as a student of history, I haven't seen an Ethiopian king referring himself to Habesha and country Abyssinia. Now, the second thing is, the second main reason where this conqueror and conquest and colonization comes from is that there is this narrative that says that Ethiopia is a post-Menelik state. My argument, it is not. Like any other European or any other country on earth whose territory expands, shrinks, depending upon the strengths and the means and the ability of kings, Ethiopia's territory had been expanding, contracting, etc., etc. But it always was Ethiopia. So if we look back to Ethiopia's history, we can go back as far as, this doesn't include legends. This, what I'm saying, is included in the chronicles of kings, written by Ethiopians, for Ethiopians. We have evidences that Ethiopian kings ruled or were ruling or have relationship of that sort, even among the Somalis, southern Ethiopia, long before, quote unquote, I'm going to say, quote unquote, the expansion of the Oromos, quote unquote. So my colleague and my elder, Guluma, knows that. The Chronicles of Amdezion, the Chronicles of David, the Chronicles of, what's his name? Naod. These are pre-15th century chronicles that deals about Ethiopian kings who had ruled the south, which now we call Oromo territory. Are there Oromos? There should be. But that is the history. So I don't know. So it's a selective kind of thing. And then regarding conquest, by the way, war is a nasty business. When the Germans, let's take that Ethiopia conquered southern, Ethiopian kings conquered southern Ethiopia. Let's take this thing. When the Germans under Bismarck brought all the Germans together, we said unification. When the Italians brought Italy together, we say unification or reunification. But we, when it comes to Ethiopia, we say expansion and conquest. By what standard? So partly because it is the way we were taught. If we had been taught using our language, Amharic, or if our history had been translated into many different languages, the history that was kept in many churches, monasteries, and mosques and individual holdings, maybe that would have given us another history. So war is brutal. When you fight a war, yes, you kill. Yes, you maybe, or you chop hands. By the way, what Menelik army did in the south is not because those people are Oromos. Let me tell you the story, starting from modern period of Ethiopia. Theodros. When Theodros went to Gojang in 1850s, they resisted him. What did he do? He literally killed them. He literally killed them. To this day, the Gojami peasant or the people, the memory is still there. As Theodros እጅግ ተዋረዱ, sorry, ሞጣ ቀራኒዮ ምነው አይታረስ በሬሳ ላይ መጣው ከዚህ እስከዛ ድረስ. Mota and Qaranio are in Gojang. These are two places. So a person was walking from Mota to Qaranio and going back. He is saying in literal meaning, there is no land that was farmed. But in reality, he was saying, Saitares, Resa, Beresa, Bere. You know, I didn't see the ox. Means literally when it's translated into wax and gold, it means I saw lots of dead people. That's what it means. And then when Theodros goes to Shoa, Bazab revolted against his king. He went back to Shoa. He captured the Shoan prisoners and chopped their limbs. As Theodros እጅግ ተዋረዱ የሸዋን መኳንንት እጅ ነስተውት ሄዱ. Theodros was really belittled himself because he bowed to the Shoans. That's the literal sense. But in reality, what it means is that Theodros chopped everybody's hand. If you look at Johannes's expansion, Johannes's when Johannes invaded Gojang, because Menelik and Tekle Haymanot had conspired behind him, he literally decimated the country. Literally. To this day, the Gojami peasant said, since the days of Johannes, Gojam had been poor, etc., etc., etc. They associate many things. Why do Ethiopian kings do? That is a question that has to be asked.
I apologize,
The laws.
Dr. Getahun.
Okay.
This is your 30-second.
Okay. The laws of the country in those days were based on the Fataha Nagast. These are pre-Christian norms and rules that were used in Israel and the pre-Christian era. So whenever a person does something against him, they chop the limbs. That's what they do. When Menelik chopped the Askari, because he thought and believed that they are his subjects, they shouldn't have allied with the enemy. So the punishment is chopping their limbs. That is the rule, and that's the norm. It's not about ethnicity, it's about resistance and retribution. It's just the ugly side of war. One more thing, please, let us look at war when it was fought in the context of time, than trying to put our judgment on the past by the standards of the present day. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Getahun. This question kind of goes off of what you've just spoken to, but it's directed to Dr. Gemeda. It's a long question. It's got about 3 parts. Any of the other speakers can step in after Dr. Gemeda's response and respond if they would like. So the question is, it is said that Menelik II's army was brutal against opponents. Is it true that Menelik's army mutilated Oromo women and men in RC, as well as Eritreans who fought with the Italians? If so, why were these brutal tactics implemented? And then and I know you've spoken to this, and then the follow-up is, was Eritrea given to Italy as a peace negotiation or not under Menelik's leadership? So please, we'll start with Dr. Gemeda.
Okay, thank you. Well, the first one I have alluded to or even partially answered in my presentation. Yes, he did. How do we know? We know from the stories or the traditions, the oral family traditions of the people who were victimized, their descendants. We are not that far away from it, as I've said, it's only some 3-4 generations since then. So I think some of the oral stories in the family could be fairly accurate, even if maybe some might exaggerate or some other things. So it happened. We're not just inventing. The second point is I've mentioned one of the direct evidences from the time, the people who are closer to that time period or who were around that. And I mentioned this Catholic missionary in Harar at the time, who says, I myself have seen people who were victimized. And he was referring to at least one incident where 400 warriors, he says Oromo notables, were amputated or their hands cut off. He was there, he was living around that area. And in fact, he has also seen evidence of this atrocity from a woman who was captured in a war in Walaita during the war in 1894. The missionaries at the time were purchasing some of these slaves or these captives. He said, I did, or our mission bought one of a woman with her child. Actually, they came to them, and so they just bought and just to liberate them. That's what they say. But it happened. But also this guy, Van der Heim, the French guy, who went to Walaita with the king, at the king's request, actually. Went with him, he witnessed. At the time, the French had stopped taking slaves. But his servants, people who were preparing food with him and keeping the camp, during the war, he says they went out and captured people and brought. And as their assigned to him as their boss, he said they gave me my share, and he got 11 captives as slaves, which Menelik eventually allowed him to keep. And when the war ended, they shared up the captives as slaves. He said Menelik got 1,800 of them, and branded. Well, war is brutal, as my friend said. Yes, we know that. And yes, the kings also indiscriminately killed people who oppose them, who oppose their war, their position. But in this case, they went into a place they have never ruled. Menelik's predecessors didn't rule Walaita, didn't rule Kaffa. These all the claims, the medieval period, the 1400, 1500. We know that. I've been teaching that course. Dr. Solomon knows that. We know. I know the story. What the chronicles are written, and we have also talked about it actually in the presentation 3 weeks or a month ago, specifically about that period. So these things existed. What the Ethiopian king Menelik did in 19th century, in fact, went, even if we accept those medieval period, 14th, 15th century areas they ruled, the places that he went to and brought under his control and took captives, in fact, was beyond that territory even. And secondly, also the difference, I think I'm partly also responding to the earlier response. Yes, Todros brutally killed the Gojami peasant. More did, in fact, the Wollo peasant, because they were Muslims, and that's a different story. Dr. Yates knows very well. But he didn't take them as slaves and sell them. Menelik did. And there is evidence it, and even in his chronicle, proudly the chronicler, Gabriel Selassie, wrote it actually, what the people they captured and took as prisoners. And the Vanderheim clearly put it. So yes, the people were killed and mutilated. That's a story. No one invented it. I think sometimes let's accept what had happened. We cannot redo it. All thing we do is we understand, we interpret it and try to move away from it than trying to justify something unjustifiable. The second point is why he did. I don't know. Yes, simply because they resisted, they were furious, and so they have to be eliminated. Yes, of course, Todros, Johannes also did that even on the Christians. But in this case, in fact, the brutality goes even beyond that. We shouldn't justify this brutality, otherwise it is going to stay with us. About Eritrea, yes, it's not only Menelik actually left, and he was probably afraid that the Italians will reinforce and will turn his victory into a defeat after Adwa. That's so he left the Italians in the hands of the Eritreans in the hands of the Italians and returned it to his court. But even before that, in the Treaty of Wuchale, had already signed off and allowed the Italians to take that land. Well, if he had a claim and he was doing a war of unification against Walaita and Kaffa and the vast Oromo territory in the south, he should have fought to the end to retain Eritrea, which was, in fact, a traditional, well-known part of Ethiopia before the Italians occupied it. But he didn't. Why? Because it was better for him to consolidate his power when he was signing the Treaty of Wuchale. He was basically, in fact, this was while before he even took power, he was trying to consolidate his power, get the arms, and prepare himself. But even after he had that, and even after he had defeated them at Adwa, he didn't really care about that. So I think we cannot reverse that. He did it. That's an obvious thing, and it's a historical fact. I think let's not excuse or try to find an excuse for him. That's a historical fact. It's done. Anyhow, I think there are. All I'm trying to say, I'm taking a little bit more time here. What I'm saying is that let us understand what happened, and let us understand why people are disagree with each other, why they see Menelik the way they see it. And by understanding that, let's look to a different and a better future than trying to justify the past, which we cannot justify or change.
I apologize. We have to.
Sorry, sorry for going.
No, you're good. Thank you for sharing. Dr. Yates, Dr. Getahun, would either of you like to share your response?
Sure, I can come in and say something about this. It's not what I was trying to say was that everything comes with the territory. You know, when you are a king, you act like a king. It's not trying to give excuses or pretexts or trying to embellish what Menelik did. What had been done is done. The only thing what I'm trying to do here is to show what had happened in other places so that people will understand why this thing happened. One. Two, to show that bringing a nation together is not done sitting around the table. Never. This is something that happens even today. People are not sitting to reconcile their differences around the table. We are seeing it. And this is not peculiar to Ethiopia, by the way. Many countries in the 200s were doing it. So what I'm trying to say is war was one of the means by which states are built. And in these circumstances, there is no selection. There is no ifs, there is no buts. You could be a Christian, you could be a Muslim, you could be an Oromo, you could be an Amhara or a Somali, whatever. If you resist, you will be punished. Let me give a simple example. Let me give you the case of Wallaga. When Menelik sent messengers to the Wallaga Oromo, meaning to the Judge Morada, Kumsa, to the Judge Jole of Jote of Dambidolo, and Sheikh Kojele of Asosa, saying that I'm coming, either you submit or I'm coming. So one of the branches of Tasamma Bakamau's army, which was sent to Ilubabor, led by the Judge Abebe themselves, I believe, if I'm wrong, Gash Guluma can correct me, was sent to Wallaga via Kafa or Jimma through Metu, etc., to subdue Wallaga. Then the three areas that constitute the former Wallaga, or today's Oromia and Benishangul, submitted. By the time they submitted, their army had already reached Arjo, which is 43 kilometers or 48 kilometers of Nakamte, which is the capital of, which used to be the capital of Wallaga. Now, immediately they were stopped, they were told to stop, and they never entered. There was no Naftanya in Wallaga, and all the three, Jote, the Judge Morada Kumsa, and Sheikh Kojele, paid tribute, recognizing Menelik as the king of kings. But in areas where there was resistance, yes, land alienation had followed. Where there was resistance, yes, mutilation in one form or another. But I beg to differ that women are not or cannot be mutilated because they are not part of the army. It's only men who are mutilated. That's what the history says. But if people can remember and tell this, I have no problem. I cannot say that, oh, I was there and I can remember. So only if you resisted. So resistance is always fought back. And that is not unique to Menelik or to anybody else, but every war unity, base unity or colonization or occupation or what have you, that is war does. basically. So this is what I'm trying to say. Not all Oromos were subjected to such things. And the other is, by the way, earlier, Bezabe, who was Menelik's blood relative and is from the same area. He was not burned, actually, Guluma. What had happened was, people sat down, decided that he should be penalized because he did these crimes. So they, in those days, the rifles were, you put those things and then you put the gunpowder and then the lead, and then there is also some clothes and things. So when they fired, the gunpowder coat his clothes and he was burned. That's why people, when he died, they said, "Antem ጨካኝ ነበርክ ጨካኝ ያዘዘብህ እንደ ገናድፎ በእሳት ተቃጠልክ," something like that. So you were cruel and a cruelty happened to you, etc. But he was not deliberately burned. It's just an accident. So yes, Menelik had done those things. By the way, was Abatona of Wolaita. Do you know where he is buried? He was buried in Selassie, next to Selassie Cathedral. And throughout his life, he was right next to Menelik with a gold chain, as a respect to his kinship, as a respect to his bravery after he was forcefully surrendered. Two places in Menelik's campaign had suffered, Harar and Wolaita. And as a matter of fact, by the way, if we look at who the soldiers of Menelik were, it's Ras Gobena Dache. These are Oromos who believed in Menelik, who helped Menelik to bring those people together. And by this time, without the Oromo cavalry, without the Oromo people, present-day Ethiopia wouldn't have been a reality. So one of the greatest weaknesses of our history is that, yes, Menelik was king of kings of Ethiopia, but who were his generals? We didn't know until very recently. That's why I said our histories are not written. Our heroes are not known. And this is not, by the way, peculiar to the Oromo generals, Oromo warriors, Oromo nation builders who worked with Menelik. If you go to the north and ask the Gondaris, ask the Gojanis, ask the Oloyes, many of the heroes, you will not find them in the chronicles of Theodorus or Johannes or Menelik or what have you. This is class. This is religion. This is royalty. That's all. It's not to erase the contribution, or it's not an attempt to erase the history of that people or other people. I do believe that Ethiopia's history, in fact, we should start from regional or local history. Every region has to write its history. If it should be in terms of ethnicity. One of the things that America taught me is that when I came to Michigan State to do my PhD, the first thing I realized that there is Michigan history. There is African American history. There is Native American history. And then, of course, there are all sorts of histories. So Ethiopia should follow that path and bring the history of those people who are voiceless and make our history complete. Let's learn from our past mistakes. That's what I'm trying to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Getahun. Yes, Dr. Yates.
Briefly, two things. Just to maybe to piggyback off what Dr. Getahun was saying, Dr. Solomon was saying about, like, I think the question was crafted in a way to support a narrative that the Oromo were treated differently than other soldiers. And again, and here the idea is that it is an incredibly brutal time. I mean, again, and I'm not going to do the both sides thing, but like if you look at, for example, there used to be an Oromo practice. I'm butchering pronunciation, wagafa, which essentially is, in order to become a man, you have to kill someone outside of your clan and put their phallus on your head and go around with it. And again, literally mutilating people, just to become an adult. And this is seen throughout a great deal of the various narratives. And again, I just want to say that it is an incredibly brutal time. And yes, that brutality existed. And I don't know anyone's trying to sit there and say it's okay. But again, you should not at all. It is an incredibly brutal time. But again, just to underscore what Solomon was saying, is that this is what happened when soldiers lost battles. Not just when Oromo lost battles or Amhara lost battles. That's what happened when soldiers lost. Two, in terms of the question about Eritrea, I think that a lot of times we forget that during that year was one of the worst famines in Ethiopia. While there were 100,000 soldiers there were 9 times the amount of auxiliaries. So we're talking about Menelik having to feed 1 million people every day. If Italy just simply waited them out, Italy would have won the war. And again, Ethiopia was going through an incredibly bad famine in 1896. And Menelik, I don't think if he wanted to, he could have fed his soldiers for another couple of weeks. Because again, the famine was worse in northern Ethiopia. And I know Guluma's going to say that, Dr. Guluma's going to say that, hey, in a lot of ways, the Oromo territories had to feed the Menelik's army. And there wasn't as bad of a famine in the southern areas. And so again, I would say that again, in terms of answering the question, it might have just been simple. We can't feed our soldiers for 2 weeks to defeat this Italian army. Therefore, we're going back. And that's it. And I would say again, in here, without looking at ethnicity or nationalism, I just don't think that Menelik had the food to pursue the Italians past Adua. Yeah, those are my 2 short points.
Can I add one more thing?
Sure.
Is that okay?
You will have 2 minutes.
Okay. Here is, in addition to the famine, because that was called Kufukan, days of trouble. In addition to the famine, there was, another thing, in addition to what had been said. More 20,000 army is coming. So yes, Menelik might have ceded Eritrea because he signed for it. 1, 2. Yes, there was famine. 3. Yes, there is a royal battle, a dynastic battle between the House of Tigray and the House of Shah. So Menelik might have, as my late professor said, might have thought a divided Tigray, meaning Eritrea and Tigray, both of them are speakers of Tigrinya. So a divided Tigray or Tigrinya speakers would be better for the Shah. He might have thought that. But let's see 3 of them. Yes, he gave his words, he signed on the paper, true. Yes, there was famine and he cannot sustain that much army. By the way, when Adwa was fought, some of the army of Menelik were not even in the battle. They were scouring for food. It's true. 3, yes, he might be thinking that. So that's what I wanted to say.
Thank you, Dr. Getahun. Thank you to all of the speakers. Like our agenda said, this is going to be the last part of our seminar. We're going to transition into the small breakout rooms. These small breakout rooms will be for 20 minutes. And in these breakout rooms, you'll have the opportunity to more intimately talk to the professors and ask your questions. We know we weren't able to get all of the questions. There was a lot of questions submitted to us. And you'll also be able to discuss and ask questions with your peers. And our hopes with these breakout rooms is not only that you learn from these speakers, but you also learn from the experiences and knowledge of other people in your breakout room as well. The last thing I wanted to mention is please respond to ideas or perspectives that are proposed by speakers or your peers. Please do not respond to a specific or attack a specific person. We're looking to critique or discuss specific ideas instead. And if you have not already requested a specific speaker, you're going to be put into a random breakout room. And for those of you who requested a specific speaker, we have put you into those breakout rooms. So just give us a minute and we will be in those breakout.
Fundamentally describe themselves using ethnic terms. And a lot of times these ethnic terms were more religious than they were ethnic. On my slide, when I put the G dash 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 dash, I'm sure you know the word I mean that was in there. That generally means pagan, not anything to do with ethnicity. Amhar, when it's used, especially if you get further and further back in time, it's used as Christian, not as referring to an ethnic group, right? And so to me, just to hopefully answer your question, that person probably had Oromo blood, but what it means to be Oromo and how it's defined means something very, very different now than it did 100, 200, 300 years ago. And I think that one of the problems we have as historians is that we want to make a history that's usable. When I say that, so here I can use Menelik the villain to fight against the Ethiopian state. I can use Menelik the hero to say that, hey, the Amhara have always been in charge, and this is what state's going to be, you know, when Amhara lead it, right? But the actual image of Menelik is extraordinarily diverse, and so people are trying to make him into something to be evidence for a larger narrative, as opposed to actually looking at what he did and debating about, you know, and not trying to put people in the boxes. So again, a long answer, sorry about that I gave, but again, answer your question. I think I've seen the same sources, and I didn't publish it in my book because I couldn't verify it. But I think that, again, it is very likely that there's a significant amount of, especially the elite Mun's dynasty, of Oromo intermarriage, because again, they expanded from a small area of Showa to become this huge thing. They did that by, I would argue, integrating and marrying with the groups around them, and many of which were Oromo. And thank you for the question. Boy, wonderful.
Thank you, Dr. Yates. And speaking of sources, State of the Horn is currently working on creating an archive of sources ranging from the early 12th century all the way up to what's currently happening in Ethiopia. And when we finish that archive, we'll also share that with everyone else because we've been getting a lot of requests about where to look for more information on these topics. So this is the end of our seminar. We want to thank our speakers so much for spending the past 3 hours with us. We really appreciate you sharing your time and knowledge with us, especially people in the diaspora who this might be their first time learning about this history. And we want to thank the audience as well for participating and really being interested in either where they come from or interested in that region of the world. And this is just a reminder that we have a closing survey that's posted in the chat right there under surveymonkey.com. And this is because we just want to make these seminars more impactful and more effective for you all. So we'd love to hear your feedback, and that includes the speakers as well. We'd love to hear your feedback. And just a reminder to the speakers, please join us afterwards. So please stay on the line for a few minutes. But everyone have a great Sunday night. Please stay safe, and thank you so much for joining us.